America Viva! On the road, talking about lived history, remarkable places, and real life.
Hello and welcome to On the Road, a very special episode of On the Road. Today I'd like to take you on a journey back through more than 30 years of life on the road, traveling across countries and continents in search of stories. Our journey begins with a phone call in the summer of 1992, or maybe it was 1993. The caller was Kurt Weichler, then editor-in-chief of Wiener, one of those lifestyle magazines that perfectly captured the cultural mood of the time, at least in Europe. It covered trends, ideas, urban culture, and the way people wanted to live. Back then, I was mainly writing about music and sports. Kurt got straight to the point. Would you like to interview Mark Allen for Wiener? At the time, Allen was the world's greatest triathlete. I knew his name even though my work as a sports journalist had focused mostly on football, some call it soccer, with a little cycling on the side. Mark Allen was dominating the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii. 3.8 kilometers of swimming in the Pacific, 180 kilometers on the bike, followed by a marathon through a lava desert. In Germany, triathlon wasn't really regarded as a serious sport yet. If people talked about it at all, it was usually along the lines of, look at those crazy guys. Meeting Mark Allen sparked something in me. By October 1994, I found myself at the Ironman in Hawaii, and I kept coming back for the following 6 years. The first time I produced a radio documentary for WDR, public radio in Germany, commissioned by probably the most demanding editor I encountered in 4 decades of journalism. I also wrote a feature for Penthouse, which in those days wasn't just Playboy's competitor, it was also one of the best magazines around for adventure journalism. Later I returned for Sports, an outstanding magazine that sadly disappeared far too soon. That time my focus wasn't on the professionals, but on the age group athletes, the amateurs, competing within their own age category. Many of them well into middle age or beyond. One of them was Sister Madonna Buddha, a Catholic nun who took up triathlon at the age of 55 and eventually completed 45 Ironman races. To this day, I often quote something she once told me, a saying she had learned from her late father. A winner never quits, and a quitter never wins. In 1997, I was in Hawaii, this time on assignment for Stern, at that point famous and fancy German weekly, when Thomas Hellriegel, Jürgen Zeck, and Lothar Leder made history by becoming 3 Germans to sweep the top 3 places in Hawaii. The day after the race, I had to track all 3 of them down. Those were innocent days. Everybody knew everybody, and everyone had everyone else's mobile number. Hawaii was only the beginning. In 1996, I spent nearly 2 months in the United States, covering the Ironman, researching a travel feature about cycling across Hawaii, and producing Surf's Up, a radio documentary on the history of surfing. My research took me to the birthplace of surfing, the 3 Hawaiian islands, Big Island, Oahu, Maui, and Kauai, and on to California. Surf's Up was the first of what would eventually be around 25 sound documentaries I produced, audio features exploring the crossroads of pop culture, politics, and history. 7 of them are available up to this day on ARD Sounds in German. But I guess some of you do understand German. This fall, I'll be releasing another one as a director's cut in German and English. But that's all I'm going to say about this. And for now. So stay tuned. For more than 2 decades, the United States were the main focus of my reporting. Partly because I had grown up with American pop culture and spent many years covering it as a music journalist. But even more because I was fascinated by what lay beneath America's glossy surface of optimism and friendliness. Religious fundamentalism, conspiracy thinking, gun culture, fantasy of violence, racism, unfortunately, ideological absolutism. And the question of why all these forces kept gaining ground until with Trump 2.0 they moved alarmingly close to the political mainstream. Over the last 15 or 20 years, however, my focus has shifted to Central and above all South America. Above all, though, South America is a treasure trove of extraordinary stories. I produced a radio documentary called Coca Loca about a prison in La Paz, Bolivia that functions like a small town, complete with rented apartments, shops, and families living inside its walls. I also made Monica La Guerrillera about the woman who took revenge for the death of Che Guevara. Both documentaries are available in ARD Sounds. People often ask me which journey was my favorite or which investigation meant the most to me. That's always a difficult question. I usually start naming a few only to realize I could go on forever. So this time, I'd rather do it differently. Let me tell you about my favorite stories, one continent at a time. Let's begin with Africa. One of my all-time favorite features took me to Port Nollef, a tiny outpost on South Africa's west coast, close to the Namibian border. About 8 hours by car north of Cape Town through a harsh, barren landscape with hardly a soul inside. It really does feel like the end of the world. My friend, the brilliant photographer Stefan Falke, who resides in New York City right now, in Brooklyn, had told me about the diamond divers who worked there, and still do. Men who searched the crushing surf of the Atlantic Ocean for diamonds washed down from the country's inland mines. Carried by the Orange River to the coast, the stones settle in the gravel beds on the seabed, where divers hunt for them. It's a brutal job. The water is freezing. Visibility is often terrible, and the surf can keep the boats ashore for days at a time. When that happens, everyone just sits around, drinks, and waits. Even when they do make it out, they often come back empty-handed. But every now and then, someone hits what they call a jackpot. Then the whole town celebrates as if there was no tomorrow. Unsurprisingly, it takes a special kind of person to dive for diamonds. Adventurers, loners, stubborn characters who don't quite fit in anywhere else. Eccentrics with an equally eccentric sense of humor, to say the least. Every single one of them a man. It was a bizarre little world. I wrote that story for Playboy and produced a radio version for WDR, public radio in Germany. I mentioned them already. Today I doubt anyone would publish it anymore. Classic adventure journalism has largely disappeared. Too masculine, too toxic maybe, some would say, politically probably incorrect. I think that's a real loss, not because everything used to be better, but because stories like these allow us to enter worlds that have nothing whatsoever to do with our own everyday life. To me, that's what diversity is really about, the diversity of human experience. Let's move on to Asia, Thailand to be precise. I love that country. It's so much fun to travel through, incredibly diverse. The food is fantastic, and above all, the people are extraordinarily kind. I remember riding a motorcycle somewhere along the west coast when I got a flat tire in the middle of nowhere. Another rider stopped, waved for me to follow him, and I pushed my bike to the nearest village. When I arrived, a repair shop was already waiting for me. They brought me a plastic chair, far too small for me, and I sat there watching them fixing the tire. They smiled at me, I smiled back. Not a single word was exchanged. They spoke no English. I spoke no Thai. Yet somehow we understood each other perfectly. Those are the moments you never forget. My assignment in Thailand was once again for Playboy and WDR. This time it was about Muay Thai, traditional Thai boxing. I followed a young fighter from a small village in northern Thailand who fought almost every evening at Bangkok's Lumpini Stadium, a plain functional arena where he climbed into the ring night after night for a fistful of baht, as so to speak. It was assembly line fighting. A fight, a little recovery, then the next. That's how he made his living. I also traveled with him back to his family in the far north. Only then I did truly understand what his life was about. His family lived in the simplest of circumstances. Every fight earned money that went straight home to his parents and his siblings. He himself lived in a tiny, tiny room in Bangkok, leading a life of relentless discipline and sacrifice. To me, he was a hero, not because he fought in the ring, but because he carried an extraordinary burden of responsibility. That story taught me that behind the spectacle of Muay Thai, there are often stories of poverty, pride, and an unwavering sense of family duty. Australia is inseparably in my mind from a feature I did on the Surf Life Savers of Sydney. The volunteer lifeguards, or some of them paid, who patrol beaches like Manly and Bondi. Australians have an extraordinary talent for turning almost anything into a competition, even the techniques of rescuing people from the sea. I was there for the World Championships of Surf Life Saving, no joke. And I spent several days with a team that was every bit as eccentric as it was likable. They were all passionate surfers who knew their beaches like the back of their hands. One of them went by the nickname of Sharkman because he supposedly kept running into sharks almost every day. His stories were completely outrageous, yet he told them with absolute conviction and infectious enthusiasm. He was a born storyteller, and that alone made the assignment unforgettable. Like so many stories from those years, this one was published also by Playboy and adapted as a radio documentary for WDR. I also fell head over heels in love with Sydney. To me, it's one of the world's greatest cities. It looked like England, but with sunshine, the Pacific Ocean, and an astonishing cultural diversity. At the time, I had only recently taken up running, so every morning I laced up my shoes and headed off in different directions. Instead of discovering Sydney with a map, I explored it one step at a time. That's still my favorite way of getting to know a city. Those have always been the stories I love the most. You set out because of one particular subject, but you come home with a much bigger story. One about people, places, and the unexpected things that happen along the way. When I think of South America, one story towers above all others. Pablo Escobar, the drug kingpin. In truth, it was never just another investigation. It became a puzzle that gradually came together piece by piece over many, many years. It began as a radio documentary for WDR. I spoke with people who had known Escobar as intimately as almost anyone alive. His former lover, Virginia Vallejo, during a 4-hour interview in Miami Beach. DEA agent Javier Peña, whom many people know as the womanizing cop from Narcos, the Netflix series. I met him at DEA headquarters in San Francisco. Also, a 4-hour interview. Escobar's brother Roberto, nicknamed El Osito, Little Bear. His sister Luz Maria, his infamous hitman Popea. His cousin Jaime, his personal photographer and longtime friend El Chino. Former Colombian President Cesar Gaviria, who himself survived an assassination attempt. Former Justice Minister Eduardo Mendoza, whom Escobar took hostage during his escape from his luxury prison La Catedral. And writers such as Jorge Franco and Juan Gabriel Vasquez, whose novel captured that violent era. Most of the interviews have never been published. Not yet. Right now, I'm turning them into a multi-part podcast for my websites. Later this year, I'll also dedicate an entire episode of On the Road to Escobar and the years I spent researching his story. Most of the interviews have never been published. Not yet. Right now, I'm turning them into a multi-part podcast for my websites. Later this year, I'll also dedicate an entire episode of On the Road to Escobar and the years I spent researching his story. North America is an easy choice for me this time. My favorite story is also the most recent one, a journey along Route 66. It resulted in a documentary for the German-French TV channel Arte. It will be broadcast on the 13th of August at prime time, a radio feature for Deutschlandfunk in Germany and an English language podcast on my website. I made the trip with my friend and cameraman Luca Schmidt. There was no crew, just the two of us. No sound engineer, no driver, nobody else. It was incredibly demanding because we were living inside the story virtually 24 hours a day. But that was also what made it so rewarding. We were completely immersed in it from the beginning to the end. And that's why I stayed in this profession for so many years, because it allowed me to lose myself entirely in a story. What interested me, however, was never Route 66 as a postcard image, not the mythology of freedom, vintage cars, and roadside diners. I wanted to know what this road actually represents. To me, Route 66 tells the story of America's westward expansion, of manifest destiny. The belief that the United States were destined to push ever farther west, claiming new land as its own. It's a subject that has become newly relevant under Trump 2.0, but one that has in reality run like an undercurrent through American history. That's why Route 66 is more than just an icon of popular culture. It is also a mirror reflecting American history in all its contradictions. Perhaps that's also the perfect conclusion to my decade-long engagement with the United States as a journalist. I've researched well over 100 stories there, maybe up to 200. And this final journey brought so many threads together. Of course, you should never say never. But right now, it genuinely feels as though this story has brought a long chapter of my life full circle. And with that, my friends, this story of On the Road comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed coming along for the ride. If you have, please like this episode, subscribe to the channel, and I'd love to hear from your thoughts in the comments. The next episode of On the Road will be released on Tuesday, July 28th, as always at 5 p.m. Central European Time. This time, I'll be coming to you from Brazil. Ciao, your Tom Noga. The next episode of On the Road will be released on Tuesday, July 28th, as always at 5 p.m. Central European Time. This time, I'll be coming to you from Brazil. Ciao, your Tom Noga.